Recently, Dilma Rousseff, the president, the 36th president of Brazil, the current president, is going through like a Bill Clinton type of lynching. So, he got a blowjob with Monica Lewinsky. It's not a crime, but it would embarrass him. It might ruin his marriage, and therefore that would lead to the unraveling of the Democratic president. That's what the Republicans spent $87 billion on to try to fuck up Bill Clinton's world, and it had nothing to do with, perjury or some principled stance on lying on the stand. It's also kind of crazy that if you lie to the judge, that's a crime, but lie to the American people, well, that's savvy. That's fucking smart, genius. Somebody gets out there and lies to the American people. That's acceptable. That's okay. But, it's a coup d'etat. They're calling it a coup d'etat against Dilma Rousseff. In the 1990s, you had Republicans spend $87 million of taxpayer money to go after Bill Clinton's perjury or his blowjob with Monica Lewinsky, and ruining Monica Lewinsky, slut-shaming her, and now, 20 years later, what has Monica Lewinsky done? She could have been, a president. She was in the White House because clearly politics mattered to her. Dilma Rousseff right now is having to go through the similar proceedings that Bill Clinton had to go through. The right wing is trying to impeach her, and they've already started the process of impeachment, meaning there's going to be a vote. A vote's going to come down the pike, or pipe, coming down the pipe or the pike. I don't know. The vote's going to come down the, pike or pipe, and then eventually we're going to see if the Brazilian people are going to impeach Dilma Rousseff. Glenn Greenwald had explained it, that essentially she might be guilty of some corruption or something about the Petro boss or something. I don't know. I think he said that he's not guilty, but the accusations of everybody that's surrounding her, including those accusing her, are bigger. So, therefore, they are accused of bigger crimes than what she's being accused of. What does that mean? That doesn't mean anything. That just means, if anything, the negotiation process is better because they was able to put some charges on them. Well, yeah, sure, it might be guilty of corruption, but you're guilty of trafficking and jaywalking and also corruption. You got two more. So I'm not for sure who's right, who's wrong. Doesn't matter. What I do know is that Dilma Rousseff is a fucking badass. She's a fucking badass. There's about 5 different studies of revolution. What I've noticed is that there's 5 different specifics, but this is why Dilma Rousseff is pretty much a badass. Okay, so she's the president of Brazil right now, the first woman to be president of Brazil. She's also an economist, and Brazil is it's got the 5th largest population in the world, the 8th largest economy in the world. And so, there's 190 people there compared to 319 million in the United States. So, way more than just half, 190 million. That's almost 200, and we got just over 3 million. So, Brazil's a huge country. Now, what I learned from Dilma Rousseff and Pepe Mujica, Fidel Castro, Hugo Chavez, and unfortunately Hitler was that if you're bold, of the bold. And so Hitler tried to overthrow the government. It didn't work. He was put on trial, goes to jail for several years. But in the meantime, they could have executed him. He tried to militarily take over the country, and so, or Bavaria. And he lost, was put in jail, wrote a book, got his message out, and then came back and was elected. As Führer was, appointed the fucking chancellor, or however the fuck it happened. There was democracy. He started winning elections, and then they had to appoint him in the chancellor spot, even though the prime minister didn't want it. I don't know. Watch the rise of evil. The point being, he tried to overthrow the government only to become the president. Same thing with all the ones that I just mentioned: Pepe Mujica, Fidel Castro, Hugo Chavez, and Dilma Rousseff. Now, With the Dilma Rousseff, it's not so specific, nor was it with Pepe. But Hugo Chavez tried to coup d'etat, tried to overthrow the Venezuelan government. Hitler tried to do that. Fidel Castro, that's what the whole Cuban Revolution was about, was a military takeover of the country, and they were able to do that. And Pepe Mujica, Dilma Rousseff is more like Pepe. Pepe Mujica fought against the right-wing dictatorships in these left-wing organizations. And that's what Dilma Rousseff did. So in 1964, there was a coup d'etat, and it was by the right-wing extremists, and Dilma Rousseff kept fighting. She was the daughter of a member of the Communist Bulgarian Party who had immigrated to Brazil for political reasons. Her father had died. Her father died in 1962 when she was 15. Dilma's Bulgarian father, so she's a Bulgarian. And the way that she was able to become president in 2002, the Workers' Party of Brazil won 4 elections in a row. So clearly the ruling class hates the Workers' Party, but she could have pissed off people along the way. In 2002, I think she was the chief of staff of the president at that time. Then after they served their 2 terms, then she was elected. And then she got reelected. And then as soon as she got reelected, these impeachment charges are going to come after her, which sucks because that's going to complicate her second term. Now, where she goes, not AWOL, but for 6 years, she fights against what they say is the dictatorship. They just call it the dictatorship. They're specific actors, but essentially it was a right-wing organization that took over for 20 years, from 64 to 85. She fought them from 64 to 70, which she was captured, tortured, and had to serve a jail sentence. So she was a student in the 60s. She campaigned locally at first for better street lighting. We need some better street lights around here. That's what she first started out with, and that's good, right? She wanted more light for the people because that's how crime can happen. Lights are good. And then during the 21-year dictatorship, she fought for revolutionary change in Brazil's politics. Apollo Lisboa, a comrade from her early days in the clandestine Marxist group Politica Operaria, Workers' Politics, or POLOP, recalls Rousseff as a familiar figure among the activists who held debates on the Vietnam War and fundraising parties dancing to Tropicalia music. So she's debating on Vietnam, exciting because we were talking about Vietnam. Vietnam affected the United States of America, but also to our neighbors in the South, in the Southern Hemisphere. Dilma was better at debating than dancing, but she was not good at public speaking. She wasn't really a leader of the masses. She was more of an organizer. This is what Apollo Lisboa is saying over a beer at the center, which still boasts a cinema and debating area. So they're saying that she was more of an organizer, but because she ran for president, they had to exaggerate some of her activities, so it's sort of hard to tell what she did and what she did not do. She needs to write a tell-all autobiography to find out who the fuck she actually is. Because these are the most exciting years to me of Dilma Rousseff's life. And her father was different. I mean, I'm going with Dilma Rousseff, but Petar Rousseff. Oh, Rousseff. R-U-S-E. Petar Rousseff, R-U-S-E-V, is who Dilma Rousseff is. She spells it R-O-U-S-S-E-F-F. Now, but still, I guess the same thing. Dilma Rousseff's life was deeply affected by the military regime which ruled Brazil from 1964 to 1985. The dictatorship, which was after the 1964 coup d'etat against the democratically elected government of the left-wing president João Goulart. And she became a socialist during her youth. Following the 1964 coup d'etat, she joined various left-wing and Marxist urban guerrilla groups that fought against the military dictatorship. She's an insurgent, dare I say it, a terrorist. But she was fighting against the corrupt right-wing government, the fucking Nazis, which is that I found a list that said that she was, what she did throughout the years. In 1967, she was a militant of the Workers' Politic, POLOP. In October 6, 1968, She was part of the group that robbed the Bank of the State of Sao Paulo in Iguatemi Street. $80,000 was taken. So Benespa. So she robbed, this bank in 68, October 12th, 68. They were planning the murder of Captain Charles R. Chandler. December 11th, 68, they robbed the Deanna gun shop, the Seminario on Seminario Street. 48 weapons were stolen. April 69, they entered Colina National Liberation Command. In 1969, January 24th, they robbed the Cantana 4th Infantry Regiment, Osasco, Sao Paulo. 63 rifles, 3 machine. They actually stole from the infantry, from the military. 63 rifles, 3 machine guns, and 4 pallets of ammunition were stolen. June or July 18th, 1969, they robbed the house of Ademar de Barros, and that was supposed to be like one of their biggest things because they stole $2.5 million and they were able to finance themselves. August 1st, 1968, robbed Sao Paulo's Mercantile Bank. September 69, Var Palmares Congress. All these are in the description, so if you want to see the actual word I'm saying. Terrorist Polis, September 69, something happened. And then September 20th, robbed the state police headquarters, Barro Branco. Now, there were some people that had died. So that's why, is it like the Weather Underground? Is it like Nelson Mandela or those Oregon people? They didn't kill nobody. It was sabotage. Mandela used the tactic of sabotage because terrorism, people are against terrorism, and so it turns the people against you. And then war is, revolution is a protracted, long struggle, and so he couldn't do that and didn't want to do terrorism, so he went with sabotage and blew up property. And the people in Oregon, they peacefully occupied the bird sanctuary, and the Weather Underground also blew up just property. And so that's a little bit different. It sounds like people had died, and they were robbing people too. So I don't know. I mean, I don't know how bad the dictatorship is. We need to make an argument for how bad this 2-decade dictatorship is. Because if this is Nazi Germany, then she's absolutely a hero. Now, if she's an opportunist, then that's not so good. But, she's robbing banks, and now she's the president of the United States. Rousseff is not the president of the United States. She's the president of Brazil. Okay, so the Brazilian military government was the authoritarian military dictatorship that ruled Brazil from April 1st, 1964 to March 15th, 1985. It began with the 1964 coup d'etat led by the armed forces against the administration of President João Goulart, who had assumed the office after being vice president upon the resignation of the democratically elected president, Jânio Quadros. Jânio Quadros had stepped down, had resigned their office for supposedly bad politics. I guess he wanted to resign and then say, no, and get them to call him back or some shit. But once he resigned, the vice president, Goulart, became the president, and then that's when the armed forces coup d'etat them. That's when they took over. Very much like Egypt. The military is running Egypt today. Sisi. Still give them money, right? We're still giving them foreign aid. We give Egypt foreign aid, Israel foreign aid. We're giving everybody foreign aid. It's how we still, control the world. And so the dictator, once they resigned, and then once Goulart was taken over, then the dictatorship lasted until Jose Sarney took office on March 15th, 1985 as president. So from 64 to 85, the dictatorship. The military revolt was fomented by Miguel Pinto, Guerrilla del Barros, Carlos Lacerda, who'd already participated in the conspiracy to depose Getulio Vargas in 1945. Governors of Minas Gerais, Sao Paulo, and Rio de Janeiro. The coup was also supported by the United States, the Embassy, and the State Department. Secretary of State. Isn't surprising, since the United States like to overthrow a lot of these Latin and South American governments. In 73, assassinated Salvador Allende. We were meddling in El Salvador, and recently in Honduras, Nicaragua in the 80s, and Nicaragua, El Salvador, and another nation. down there, and that's, why the fuck would, and then in Venezuela, we tried to assassinate Hugo Chavez, and so this is, we're still doing stupid shit like this, and so we're the one that is responsible for the military dictatorship that lasted in Brazil for 20 years, and that's the reason why Dilma Rousseff had to fight against it. So, maybe she should thank us, because if it wasn't for us providing the oppression, she couldn't have been the revolutionary fighter that she is today. Rousseff has already seen one coup d'etat, and now they're seeing it again. She was elected. She's the president. In fact, she should try to ignore these entire proceedings. The more that they get bogged down by it, you're the president. Nixon says if the president does it, it's not illegal. So you're the fucking president, and they can only waste your time for the next 3 years while you serve out your term. So the military dictatorship from the 64 to 85 lasted for almost 21 years, despite initial pledges to the contrary. Military governments in 1967 enacted a new restrictive constitution, stifled freedom of speech and political opposition with support from the U.S. government. The regime adopted nationalism, economic development, and anti-communism as its guidelines. Over the next couple of decades, she participated in organized resistance of leftist and Marxist groups. Dilma emerged as a leading figure in the VAR Palmares, a political military organization of Marxist-Leninist partisan orientation. The attorney who prosecuted the organization called her the Joan of Arc of subversion. The Joan of Arc was a fucking badass. In France, you love Joan of Arc. She was just inspired by God to go kill the English. And then the king said, well, here's some fucking weapons and shit. And then she was successful until she wasn't. They also say that she was the mastermind of a robbery of $2.5 million from a former governor of Sao Paulo, Sao Paulo, and it was used to fund their organization, their leftist resistance activities. As the political climate grew more charged, Dilma Rousseff left Palop and joined a guerrilla group that robbed banks and took hostages. In her early youth, she joined a communist group, became a guerrilla. At 21, she was already participating in bank robberies to fund the guerrilla activities. So she's robbing banks, taking hostages, and apparently some people died, some of the military and some of the police. In one of these actions, the police found the group's meeting place and invaded it. The members received the police with machine guns, and 2 police officers were killed. Dilma Rousseff had sometimes been described as the mastermind of the theft of a safe belonging to a former governor of Sao Paulo named Ademar de Barros. The action was carried out on June 18, 1969 in Rio de Janeiro and netted $2.5 million in U.S. Currency. It became the most spectacular and profitable action of the armed struggle. On at least 3 different occasions, Dilma Rousseff herself denied participating in the event. Testimonials and police reports indicated that Rousseff was police reports said that Rousseff was responsible for managing the money from that robbery, paying the salaries of the militants, finding shelter for the group, and buying a Volkswagen Beetle. Dilma Rousseff said she only remembers purchasing the Volkswagen Beetle, and she doubts that she was the one responsible for managing the money. Now, I'm going to leave, this is what she looked like. The bi-spectacled 1970 Dilma Rousseff very much has a Bernie Sanders vibe, right? Looks like a nerd, looks like a dork, but she's a badass because she's going around fighting for what she believes in, against the dictatorship, against right-wing fascism, against the corporatocracy, against corporatism. That's how important this was to her. And so, cops had died in some of these excursions. $2.5 million was robbed from Barros. They said it wasn't her, but, Dilma Rousseff only remembers purchasing the car and doubts that she was one responsible for managing the money. Well, I doubt that's true. That doesn't sound right. Well, if you did or you didn't, okay? So it seems like she was very much a senior official of the organization, even if she wasn't the mastermind. In 1969, VAR Palmares allegedly planned the kidnapping of Antonio Delfim Neto, a symbol of the Brazilian miracle and the most powerful civilian in the federal government at the time. Even with large amounts of money, the organization failed to maintain its unity at a conference held in Teresópolis between August and September 1969. There was a major dispute between those who supported the armed struggle and those who advocated working for the masses. Dilma Rousseff was in the second group. The first group split into the paramilitary VPR. This is an important, sort of schism, a rift in the group. So they're saying that one said, let's do armed struggle, and then the other one said, let's work with the masses, which I don't even understand that distinction. But they are trying to say that Lamarca, who led the VPR, who was the paramilitary group who wanted armed struggle, they split off. And so the first group split off into the VPR, and then the second group was split into the VAR Palmares, which was including Rousseff. So Rousseff goes in the second group. Now, the numbers, only 7 members go with Lamarca, VPR, and 20 of the people go with Dilma. So most people, she, not the mastermind, not the one in charge, but they went the same route that she went. Out of 37 people, 30 people went with Dilma Rousseff, and 7 went with the VAR, or with that other guy that I mentioned, Lamarca, the VPR member, Lamarca. And so there was a dispute over money and weapons. After the split, Rousseff was sent to Sao Paulo, I'm sure I'm fucking that name up, Sao Paulo, where she was in charge of keeping her group's weapons safe. She avoided the risk of keeping them in apartments by moving in with a friend, Maria Celestes Martins, who had become her chief of staff assistant decades later, to a simple boarding house in the eastern zone of the city where they hid the weapons under their beds. In 1968, she was important enough to dispute with the famous communist guerrilla leader Carlos Lamarca, which is what I had already talked about. Same thing, but again, well, it's important because it shows who she is in the movement. Now, there's an argument against Carlos Lamarca and Dilma Rousseff about the VAR Palmares, which is the Palmares Revolutionary Armed Vanguard. VAR, Vanguard Armed Revolutionary, which is one of the most violent groups, supposedly, in the history. Some of these people are coming from the opposition just to be like, look at this terrorist. Well, she's not a terrorist anymore, and she's served her crime, her sentence, and she's the fucking president, right? My thing is just that people like boldness, right? So how did she get elected president? They had to have known some of these things, but she was part of the administration. There was a continuity. They liked the person that she had worked for. She was a chief of staff for some guy, and then they liked him, and then they liked her. So they I would say that most people ignored this part of her history, but this is my favorite part. This is badass. She was very 37 leaders, 7 goes with Lamarca, and 30 of them goes with Dilma Rousseff. Now, she, along with 2 successive lovers, planned many of the group's actions, including the robbery of the house of Ademar de Barros, the governor of the state of Sao Paulo, the break-ins of military headquarters and gun shops to steal weapons and ammunition, and a frustrated attempt to kidnap Brazil's Treasury Minister, Delfim Neto. And so, they said that there was hostages, and some of the police and the military people had got shot. They broke into the military headquarters or breaking into gun shops. I don't know. I feel like it's war. And so, these actually seems like very tiny tactics in the whole scheme of things when it comes to war. The atrocities that that some people can fucking do to others. 1 million Iraqis are dead. 6 years of being an urban guerrilla, an insurgent fighting against the government of Brazil, the right-wing military dictatorship of Brazil. Eventually, she is caught in the beginning of 1970. She fights for 6 years, 64 to 69, without getting caught, but then eventually Jose Olavo Liete Ribeiro is the one who leads to their capture. That's a person in her group, Jose Ribeiro. He met 3 times a week with Rousseff. He was captured by the military. and he had reported Ribeiro was tortured for a day. He eventually revealed the place where he would meet another militant in a bar on Raul Augusta in Sao Paulo. On January 16, 1970, he was forced to go to the bar accompanied by undercover policemen, where his colleagues goes to the bar. He turns in one of his fucking guys. They don't say the name, and they're there with undercover police officer. His colleague comes in. They capture. No word of what happens to this colleague. Right? That's why we need to look at the dictatorship. How bad was this dictatorship? You know, in Chile, after they assassinated Salvador Allende, there was a dictatorship. After in El Salvador, after their leadership was taken out by the United States, there was 30 years of civil war. And so, you know, we fuck up these people's economy, and then there's civil war for fucking decades. We did this shit with Libya. Gaddafi, you know, might not have been a very good guy, but was it because he's a dictatorship, or was it because he wanted to unite all of Africa? Also heard he gave like $50,000 to married couples and give them a house and a car for free. They're oil-rich economy, so I don't know. She was captured on January 16th, 1970. You have Jose Ribeiro with the police in a bar in Raul Augusta in Sao Paulo. The colleague is arrested, who he turned over, but for some reason Dilma Rousseff unexpectedly arrived when they were preparing to leave. So that they weren't even expecting her, but she shows up out of nowhere, maybe for, you know, concern for her friend who just got captured. And then when they realized something was wrong, Dilma Rousseff tried to leave the place without being noticed. The officer suspected Dilma Rousseff, searched her, and then found that she had a gun. If it wasn't for the gun, it's possible she probably would have escaped, says Ribeiro. Why does a woman have a gun? What are you doing? You know, Rousseff was considered a big enough catch. Military prosecutor labeled her the Joan of Arc. The Joan of Arc, I mean, some of this I think is propaganda, and they're trying to dramatize it to make it seem like they did something bigger than what they actually did. She also became president. And so that's, I don't know, I want her to be the Joan of Arc. Joan of Arc was a badass fucking, you know, figure in world history. I mean, French history, but world history. So she was captured in January 1970. She was tortured for 22 days and then kept in prison for 3 years. She had a gun in her handbag. She was sent to the Terra Dentes prison, which was nicknamed the Tower of the Maidens because most of the prisoners were young women. So she was sent to the Tower of the Maidens, and the guards tortured her with electric shocks, sexual abuse, beatings. Dilma Rousseff later said she still had trouble chewing because of the damage to her jaw. So they broke her jaw. Dilma Rousseff was taken to the OBAN headquarters, the same place where, after she had been caught with the gun in her handbag, Dilma Rousseff was taken to the OBAN headquarters, the OBAN headquarters, the same place where Vladimir Herzog would be tortured and killed 5 years later. So if they're torturing and killing people, these are murderers. These are killers themselves. And so when one of these, you know, goons are shot, that's part of the Nazi fucking republic. Are you the bad person? You're very much the good person. That's why we got to honor Anne Frank. I don't know why there's so much talk about how great Adolf Hitler was. We ignore the Anne Frank and the, you know, Schindlers of the world by saying Hitler was good or fucking smart. He was stupid. He invaded 2 fucking fronts, Russia and the United States. He didn't have to declare war on the United States. He was a dumb, shitty fucking military thing. It's almost, he was suicidal, so they killed Vladimir Herzog at the OBAN headquarters where Rousseff was taken. She was tortured for 22 days, punching, Ferule, F-E-R-U-L-E, electric shock devices, as Maria Luisa Belloc, cellmate, said Dilma was shocked even with car wiring. And they would take car wiring and shock her. Some ex-military officers have dismissed Dilma Rousseff's account, saying she could not have survived that extent of torture. Oh, okay. Well, the ex-military officers, fuck this shit. I think what we need to do is individualize each one of these people. You can't just say the member of the police, member of the military. Well, they're human, and they very much are capable of committing crimes. So are they a good person? Are they part of the good guys, the good gang? the ruling class, or, the individuals. I'm tired of it just being military, and then they fall into the... Rousseff denounced the torture that she suffered in court proceedings, citing even the names of those who tortured her, such as the Army Captain Benani de Arruda Albernaz, mentioned by several other witnesses. Although she revealed the locations of some militants during torture interrogation, Rousseff managed to preserve the identities of Carlos Araujo, who would be arrested several months later, and Maria Celeste Martins. Rousseff's name was on a list found at Carlos Lamarca's home on a list of prisoners who would get priority in exchange for hostages, but she was never exchanged, and she served out her sentence. Carlos Araujo was arrested August 12, 1970, after Dilma Rousseff was captured. He had an affair with actress and fellow militant Bette Mendez. After his arrest, he met Rousseff on some occasions during displacements regarding the military lawsuits. Both were being... her lover, Carlos Araujo, and Dilma Rousseff had met on several occasions. They were even a few months in the same prison in Sao Paulo, where during conjugal visits they reconciled, planning to resume married life after being released from jail. So, they got some fucking ass. They're in prison in Sao Paulo, and, Dilma Rousseff is getting some ass while she was there. They're going to resume married life after they're released from jail, making all these future plans. Dilma Rousseff was convicted in the first instance to 6 years in prison, having already served 3 years when the Supreme Military Court reduced her sentence to 2 years and a month. She also had her political rights suspended for 18 years. She was arrested in 1970, condemned to 6 years in jail. After 3 years, her sentence was shortened. Then she was released in 1972 when she moved to Porto Alegre. So she served her jail time. She served her 3 years in prison, and that's the story of Dilma Rousseff being a urban guerrilla, leftist, Marxist sort of insurgent. And so here's a list of people that supposedly were killed by Dilma's terrorist group. The journalist, which in a bomb explosion at the Recife airport. Retired admiral died, Gomez Fernandez, Regis de Carvalho, Lieutenant Alberto Mendez Jr. His head was smashed, beaten with rifle butts. He offered himself as ransom. 19-year-old soldier Mario Cozell Filho, Captain Charles R. Chandler's, an American, murdered by 14 rounds from a machine gun. The 4-year-old soldier Mario Cozell Filho killed in an explosion of 100 pounds of dynamite. Now, the only reason I'm reading on any of this guy was, it was a hit piece saying this, she's a terrorist, how dare we elect her, but there's not that information. She hasn't talked about, these 6 years or these 9 years or so when she was fighting against the government and during her captivity. I'm sure she talked about the torture because she's a victim then, but what about when she was the aggressor? She's fought against one coup d'etat with violence, and so I think that, she should be able to handle herself in Brazil today. Unfortunately, it's impeachment proceedings, so it's not a coup d'etat. That's rhetoric, and it wasn't a true blue coup d'etat like she had to fight. Now, the last thing I want to mention is whether or not these guys that were killed were good or bad remains to be seen. If they were killers, then say